Reese, I'm not sure which one's on. Anyway, I'll use this one. How's that? Thank you for the great welcome. Yes, we do go back a few years. The beard and the hair was longer. We used to look forward to Reese's visits for a couple of reasons. One of them was that Reese would come and screw with my brain. I don't know if you've ever had that experience with Reese. I'm sure that's true. I've just never thought of it that way before. And he really helped me get out of my church world and think about the scriptures and Jesus in really helpful and practical ways. The other reason was it was the one time of the year that as a family we went out for dinner. Reese would take us out and we would have Thai on a single chaplain's wage. You'd know this, Troy, I'm sure. On a single chaplain's wage, we just never went out for dinner. It just didn't ever happen. And so it was fabulous. So thank you for the invitation. It's great to be ministering on the Fraser Close in somewhat proximity. In many ways, Maryborough Baptist Church and Hervey Bay Church of Christ would be kind of sister churches in terms of the way that we see things and operate and understand the world. And we've got Boys Brigade. And down at Hervey Bay Church of Christ, we also have Girls Brigade. And so I want to acknowledge the Girls Brigaders who are here. And acknowledge every one of you, whether you're a visitor or a regular adherent here. It's fabulous to have you here, and thank you for the invitation. Here we go. We're going to read from Luke 2. Hang on. There we go. Read from Luke 2, starting at verse 39. When Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival, according to the custom. And after the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But they were unaware of it. And thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. And then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. And when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. And then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. You know, William Alexander Smith was a drill officer in his local Army Reserve unit, and he was a Sunday school teacher. And he said, wouldn't it be great if we could combine those two ideas? If we could have the discipline of the men who are on parade, and we could have the spirituality and the growth and the Bible knowledge of the Sunday school kids. And out of that idea and that vision that God placed in his heart, Boys Brigade was born. And I might add, other uniform youth groups have come out of that in one form or another. And they all kind of come out of that initial idea. I'm going to reflect on that passage a little bit. And I'm also going to share to you some ideas that come from some of the best children's and youth workers in our country, as they have wrestled with what is it that grows young people into lifelong discipleship of Jesus. And why is it that some seem to get it and others fall away? And I want to suggest to you that one of the foremost understandings for not just for children, but for every single one of us is this formula. Information plus formation leads to transformation. If we think about that just for a minute, just knowing the Bible does not necessarily lead to transformation. I don't know if you've ever met anybody who has lots of Bible knowledge, but their life doesn't live up to it. And just having a disciplined life, just having a life that should be of prayer, of various spiritual disciplines, in and of itself does not lead to a transformed Jesus life. It can lead to all sorts of airy-fairiness and error. But the two together are the parts that work. And I think that was, in a way, what William Alexander Smith recognized. That the practices and the habits are as important as the Bible knowledge as we are formed into Christ-likeness. And so today I want to discuss I'm going to be very quick at this, but 2 foundational principles and 8 important pillars. We're going to get through 10 really quickly, particularly when we are discipling young people and children. So take a quick journey with me, if you would. Because the background to our passage is that Mary and Joseph had taken the baby Jesus to the temple to be circumcised to fulfill all the requirements of the law. And there, Simeon and Anna have recognized that this baby, there is something special about this baby. This baby is the promised coming Messiah, and they prophesy over him. And Jesus grows as all children do, but we're told also in wisdom and grace. All children will grow physically. It's just part of our DNA. If they get enough food and sleep, they'll grow physically. But not all children grow automatically in wisdom and grace. That requires some additional input. Do you know, even the physical growth can be affected. In World War I, the Australian diggers were on average 6 inches taller than the English Johnnies. Now, these are people of exactly the same genetic stock. The difference was nutrition and lifestyle. The same can be said about our true spiritual growth, emotional maturity, and character development. You need the right spiritual nutrition to grow strong and healthy. In this passage, it's the only little bit that we get about Jesus growing up, Jesus as a child. He is not at full maturity here. You'll notice that there's one example that just shows it. There's a breakdown in communication between Jesus and his parents. That somehow the child Jesus has got so enthralled, so fascinated with the conversation that's going on in the temple that he hasn't told his parents where he is. Have you ever been in that position? I was in that position like every other day as a boy anyway. Something would so grab my attention that it didn't matter what else was going on. I was just, whoa, this is great. Don't talk to me. This is too good. And Jesus somehow fails to tell his parents where they are. Notice something else, though. So why Jesus is not sinning, but he's not at full maturity yet either. The other thing that happens, of course, here is that we might notice is that Jesus' parents are not 21st century helicopter parents. They are not trying to make sure that there is nothing that can possibly hurt him. It goes for a whole day before they notice that he's missing. And they have trusted that somehow he's being looked after by somebody, surely. So, someone in the community must have him. It's okay. Sometimes we can actually rob our children and our young people of potential opportunities to grow because we want to protect them from anything that could possibly ever hurt them. That is a recipe for failure. That is a recipe for disaster. But we read in verse 41 that every year Jesus' parents went up to the temple. Is it all right if I pick this lectern up? Or walk forwards? Oh, it's adjustable. Oh, hey, how good's that? That'll be much better, thank you. We see that every year Jesus' parents went to the celebration of the Passover and up to the temple. Every year. There is no doubt that Mary and Joseph were devout in a really healthy way. That they were consistent in all of their spiritual disciplines and the things that they did. And then when Jesus is getting there, when he's there, that's okay. When we're there, I got an opinion that before Jesus gets there, he is already engaged in a process of asking questions, of being engaged, of wanting to know. And we'll come back to that. And we already mentioned that there was a larger community, right? That Jesus' parents assumed that he's being taken care of by somebody in their community. That eventually they'll find him, and eventually they do, but it's not in their immediate community. They find him sitting at the feet of the teachers asking questions. Now here's what's important. Because here's what we need to know about two foundational principles for discipling children into faith. Mark de Vries writes in his book, Family-Based Youth Ministry, that almost without exception, those young people who are growing in faith as adults were children and teenagers who fit into one of two categories. One, they came from families where Christian growth was modeled by at least one of their parents, or they had developed significant connections with an extended family of adults within the church. How often they attended youth events, including Sunday school and discipleship groups, was not a good predictor of which teens would or which ones would not grow into Christian adulthood. It had to be about relationship. For young people to grow into faith, to grow from childhood faith to childlike faith, they need adult connections who can encourage them, about all the things that Jesus values. It is important if they have a parent, but it is just as important that they have somebody who is not a parent who they can look to in their larger faith community, in their church, or at their Brigade's company, or both. And that they might... it is really important that there is intergenerational connections. Now, before I go on, I want to say that I think one of the reasons that Boys and Girls Brigade has been successful for 141 years and 125 years, the reason it's still around is because they've actually got a lot of what I'm talking about right. And it's not been done intuitively. They have discovered over time what is it that works, and they've been able to apply it. So if you're a girls' brigade leader or a boys' brigade leader, I hope that this is an encouragement and not something new. But if you're in the larger church, the challenge is to say, not, oh, isn't it nice just to have children running around? But how might I be part of the intergenerational connections with young people? One of my most early treasured possessions is of an elderly couple in my church when I was a young fella who welcomed me and loved me, who I get to sit next to, who would tell me stories about the old days. I wanted to be there every week just so I could meet with them again. Every one of us plays a role in building those intergenerational connections. So here's the first pillar. That is to serve in mission. At brigades, children are not the mission. They must be and are included at every point in the mission. When my boy was in grade 1, he sat next to a girl whose mum was a drug addict. It was widely known in the whole community who she was, and she had something of a reputation. But my boy Sam said one night at dinner, "Could we invite Angela over for dinner?" I said, "Oh, sure." Why is that? Well, she doesn't always get dinner. One morning I woke up and I went downstairs at our place, and there were 3 boys watching TV down there that I didn't know. I came back up and I said to my wife, "Do you know who those 3 boys are?" And she said, "No." I said to my kids, "Do you know who those 3 boys are who are watching TV downstairs?" And Sam says, "Oh yeah, they're the Smith boys." I said, "Oh, okay, who are they?" He says, well, their dad leaves for work at 5:30 every morning. So I told them they could just come to our place and watch TV until we're all ready to walk to school. They did that every 5 days a week for 2 years. This is just including our children in mission. We took our children on a mission trip to Vanuatu. Not because the Vanuatu needs Jesus and we white people need to take it to them. No, the purpose of our trip was just so our children might see a different world and might be able to participate with the people there in mission. Serving in mission is important for the faith development process because Jesus commands us to serve in mission as we go, because we learn best by doing, because shared experiences bond us together in deeper relationships. In this passage, we don't get an example of Jesus serving in mission. But think about the rest of the Gospels. That's what Jesus did over and over and over. His whole ministry was about serving in mission, about finding people who wanted to hear about Jesus, about training and leading people to be the place where he could eventually send them on the Great Commission, these 12 guys who were the B grade team, who were just ordinary fishermen and ordinary tax collectors, and they were the ones empowered by the Holy Spirit who were going to change the world. But my question to you is, do you think Jesus just started then? I think this had been a lifestyle, and it had been a lifetime of practice that he had been led into. Next one is similar, but it's responding with compassion. You know, compassion is one of the most important emotions that drive appropriate kingdom activity. Most of us have got responding in compassion worked out if we are a follower of Jesus, taking it seriously. We discover that our neighbour is sick, so we decide we'll cook a meal for them, or we'll mow their lawn, we'll do something that might help them. The trick as an adult, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a brigades leader, is to say, how might I include my children around me in responding with compassion? Jesus, we see, again, throughout his ministry, is responding in compassion over and over again. It's important that we are talking with children about the feeling of with and for others that leads to actions. But Jesus had compassion on the multitude, on the hungry, and he did something about it. His parable characters had compassion before they do something merciful. Responding with compassion is important for faith development because we get to sit with the heart of Jesus, because we see with the eyes of Jesus, because we serve with the hands of Jesus. Number three, this is an important thing for Baptists because I know that Baptists know their Bible. How many stories are there in the Bible? Well, that's how many books there are. Good job. Well done. How many stories? Come on, think about it. Add them up. There's one big story. You are correct. There's just one story in the Bible, and it goes from the beginning to the end. It starts with creation and ends with new creation. And it kind of happens in 6 acts, and there are actions that go along with it. So, might have to put this down, all right? So we can do the actions. Now, just a reminder, whenever we're doing actions, whether it's songs or just like this, if you're not doing it, then you get shamed. You get brought up the front here to do it for everyone, all right? So it's compulsory, all right? So we'll lead you through it, okay? All right. I can put it on the stand. How about that? That's what it's for. All right, ready? Creation. All right, everyone do it together, right? Creation. All right. The second act is the fall. It's terrible. All right, ready to go back to the beginning? Creation, the fall. All right, the third act is Israel. It's like a crown. You know, the kings. Yeah, that's it. All right, ready from the beginning? Creation, the fall, Israel. Next one is Jesus, like Jesus on the cross. That's it. All right, so from the beginning, ready? And let's say it as we do it. Ready? Creation, the fall, Israel, Jesus, the church. Like this church, got a spire, right? Excellent. And the last one then, let's go from the beginning. Ready? Creation, the fall, Israel, Jesus, the church. And the last one is new creation. All right, from the beginning. Ready? Creation, fall, Israel, Jesus, the church, new creation. So it is one big story that can be told in those 6 parts. Now, when I was a boy, what I got was lots and lots of information. And the information generally came in this form of micro stories. Got David and Goliath, right? So we got to hear about David killing Goliath. And then the implicit or the explicit message was, so be like David. And it was like, you mean we get to cut off the heads of bullies? Yeah. Or is it just tall people, miss, we should cut the heads off, right? And or it'd be, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. A wee little man was he. He climbed up on a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. Miss, why was the tree sick? Well, the tree's not sick. Oh, it's because he weed on it. Right? And all of the girls' brigade leaders are like, oh, man, I'm so happy I don't have to work with boys. Here's the thing about one big story, is it's not yet being finished being written. The new creation part is yet to come, and we're in the church phase. We're still part of it. The scriptures, in a sense, are still being written. We have a part to play. all of those micro stories were supposed to give us Bible information, but it was a bit confusing as to where did I fit? What role did I play? Instead, when we look at the scriptures, we're not supposed to say, you should be like that character, unless it's Jesus. It's more like, can I see myself in the character? Can I see my own failings and frailty and gifts and opportunities? Is there a way that I might understand myself better? And as Calvin says, inside of yourself, understanding yourself is a prerequisite to understanding God. And it allows us to ask interesting and healthy questions. Did you see what Jesus was doing? In the temple with the wise men, he was asking questions. In the church world that I grew up in, the Sunday school kind of environment that I grew up in, questions were a bit suspect. Questions might well be the path to doubt, and doubt the road to disbelief, and disbelief the highway to hell. But Rabbi Jonathan Sacks points out that one of the reasons that Jewish culture has so survived for so long is because it has always encouraged questions. It has encouraged children to ask questions. So if you get to the Passover meal, the youngest cognitive child is supposed to ask, Father, what does this meal mean? And there's a whole series of questions that are meant to be asked through that. And Jesus is sitting and asking questions of the teachers. And because it's Jesus, they're amazed at his maturity and the quality of his questions. Teaching children to ask good quality questions of the big story is so important. In evangelical culture, we want to approach the scriptures so often with what's right. What's the right answer? And we have a test of orthodoxy and a test of fellowship as to whether you believe the same things that I believe. In Jewish culture, you approach the Bible with questions. And if you start with one question, you end up with two, that's a good night. If you end up with five, that's a fantastic night. Asking beautiful and empowering questions might well open up all sorts of self-knowledge. And when I am seeing myself as part of the one big story, it's the path to insider maturity. Working through this quickly now. Encounters with Jesus. Remember, it's information plus formation that leads to transformation. In a world full of entertainment and constant action that fears boredom, space has to be created for regular encounters with Jesus. It's Jesus himself who says that it's my sheep who will know my voice. Within our faith community and our household of faith, we need to be intentional about providing spaces to encounter Jesus, to create spaces to hear from God, to learn his voice, to encounter him together, to share our stories and encounter with each other. It's important that we be intentional and make this a priority in our life. Encounters with Jesus are important for faith development because we get to meet with a Jesus who's real. We get to meet a Jesus who wants to communicate with me. We meet with a Jesus who transforms lives. In our programs, as we are thinking about putting things together, it is important that we are creating space for encounters with Jesus. In our family settings, as we're sitting around the dinner table, is there moments where we go, let's just practice the presence of God? Let's take a moment to recognize that he's here and I'm open to him. In the older boys, there's a couple of lads here who've done the Boys Brigade leadership course, or at least one. In the middle of that, in the boys and the girls course, there's a 3-day solo where they get to spend time just by themselves with God, the Bible, a notebook. That's it. That is creating space for an encounter with Jesus. When we look at Jesus' life and ministry over and over, we see that Jesus is going and he is spending time alone in prayer. My contention to you is this: he didn't start that at 30. It was shown to him by his parents, and it was developed through a lifetime. Number 5, positive peer community. You know, we grow to be like our friends. And if every child needs at least one adult, they also need at least one peer who can encourage them in their faith. We're not meant to travel alone in this life. I'm going to move on quickly. Number 6, peak experiences. Our church down at Harvey Bay is half the size of this one. You know, one of the things that makes it difficult to do in a small church setting is create peak experiences. But one of the best parts about being part of brigades is somebody else is preparing them for you. You can send your boy or your girl away to juniors camp or to a battalion event, or you can send them off to the leadership course. And you know that there is a peak experiences are already being organised for you. And peak experiences are actually vitally important. I remember my own experience on a youth camp as a 14-year-old. And I just spent some hours crying and shaking and having snot come out my nose. And people coming up and saying, "Are you all right?" And I'm just like, "Go away. Of course I'm okay." Because the wrestle for me at that point wasn't, do I want to follow Jesus? It was, am I willing to follow him no matter what it took? Was I willing to follow him into a lifetime of ministry? That was a peak experience that I still remember and can go back to. Terry Williams, who works for Scripture Union and is one of the most fantastic children's workers in our country, says that one of the reasons that he grew up into faith, whereas many of his peers fell away, was that he went on every Scripture Union camp he possibly could. We need to be creating peak experiences. Next one is mentoring. And mentoring, and the difference between mentoring and those generational connections is just the purposefulness, the deliberateness of it. Children need adults who are going to coach them and mentor them. Now, I don't think Jesus was asking the kind of questions as he did of the Pharisees many years later. He was 12. He was hungry for knowledge. He was hungry for understanding. I can only imagine what the questions might have been that Jesus was asking, because they're certainly the kinds of questions that I was asking at that age when I read the Scriptures and found them thoroughly confusing. Why was Abraham wanting to sacrifice Isaac? That is a little bit confusing to me. Okay, so Samson kills 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone. Was God pleased? Jesus' questions, I imagine, were about information and knowledge and wisdom. But imagine if there was no one there to answer them. As a boy, I was a part of something similar to Brigades, had a different name. But in the years 9 to 11 age group, I had an adult mentor, a man named Robert Rue, who spent hours and hours with me. In the 12 to 15 years, I had a man named Simon Walford, who taught us all sorts of crazy and outdoor stuff, but was an absolute model of what Christian manhood should be. And what I saw, were the habits of obedience, reverence, discipline, self-respect, and all that tends towards true Christian manliness. Are we being deliberate about mentoring and coaching and connections of adults with children? And pillar 8 are rites of passages. Rites of passages happen in every possible culture and every place except the Western world, where we seem to have forgotten their importance. A rite of passage involves some kind of a period of liminality where there's a space between where a boy becomes a man and they have to do something that's painful and difficult and achieve it, and then it is recognized that they have achieved it at the end by the whole community. In our church, in Brigades, for both boys and girls, what are we doing that's a rite of passage that we get to the end and we say, we recognize that you are now an adult? Dads and lads camps and baptisms and Boys Brigade leadership courses are all good examples of rites of passage, but it needs to be the whole community recognizing it. Now, each of these are part of a structure that leads to a lifetime of faith. And James Clear says we don't rise to the level of our goals, but fall to the level of our systems. So in our family of faith and in our community of faith, our church, that includes our brigades companies, what are the vehicles that we're using to help disciple young people? What are the deliberate ways that we are encouraging the foundational principles and the pillars that prop up the lifetime of faith? And in our planning and in our structures, in the very systems and our operations, are we deliberately seeking to build disciples? Are we working not just on hope, but with deliberate purpose towards seeing young people grow in wisdom and grace of God and in favor with God and man? I want us to take a minute of reflection, a minute of silent reflection about what we've heard this morning. And our final task is to turn to your neighbour. And what is one thing I think I need to do because of today's message? Have a chat with them. Lord, help us to follow you and follow through on what you have invited us into this morning, we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Andrew. I think the one thing, if there was one thing that I was looking at that potentially might be missing in the grid of 10, it's that whole, but it's kind of implicit. It's that whole idea of it takes a village to raise a child. You know, we so often say, oh, well, we'll hand our children to the schools and they'll give them back to us when they've got a brain, you know. Or as a church we say, oh, that's children's ministry, or that's boys' brigade. And we have this mentality of being siloed. And one of the joys that I've had over the recent months has been the way we're starting to partnership more intentional with Bayside College, and to see that we actually have both people in the church, but we have input to take with us into that college as well. And I think it's kind of trying to break out of the silos that we have. I mean, I got to tell you, it's so good, Girls' Brigade, to have you mob here. And I'm really hoping at Maryborough that we can actually be strategic and intentional about doing more stuff together. And I apologise to you that's actually taken this moment. And thank you for coming. But Cole, I reckon I'm seeing something here that's bigger. And I think it's probably time to get our heads together with our fairer counterparts and say, okay, how can we do this? How can we be intentional about creating these spaces to do something together in community? And I guess, you know, that, and I really like the one big story, Andrew, that Jesus has given us an amazing story. And so as we bring this morning to a close, I'd like us to stand together to sing that Christ, this great song, and opens up, Christ is my reward. So let's stand together and sing, shall we? Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ, my all in all, the joy of my salvation, and this hope will never fail. Heaven is our home. Through every storm, my soul will sing, Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need.
Christ is enough.
Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back.
cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, no turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need.
Thanks again, Andrew. Thanks, Boys Brigade. And we'll retire the colours in a moment. You're very welcome. I walked out to get a bottle of water a little earlier. There's some lovely aromas coming from the kitchen. So you're welcome to stick around for morning tea. But we're going to retire the colours, and then we're going to finish just with a refrain that I've decided to follow Jesus. So, Tony, if I could welcome you to retire the colours, the boys will retire, and then we'll come back with this refrain and go for morning tea. I have decided
To follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning